Hey, good morning or afternoon or evening, wherever you are in the world. Hey, it's Christine. It's been a hot minute since I've seen you live. I wanted to check in. Now, why am I dressed up like this? Well, if you live in North America, or maybe anywhere in the Northern Hemisphere right now, you might be really cold and be shoveling snow like I've been, right? But we don't want to think about that. We want to think about spring. Spring is coming. Spring is only a couple weeks away. And so I've been working on a new course on wildflowers. So I just wanted to share some of my favorite wildflower memories that I've been thinking about as I've been working on this class. And maybe you've got some good memories too. So I'd love to have you put them in the chat box if you have any good memories of flowers or wildflowers. Now, the more I thought about it, the more it came to mind. I think probably my earliest memory of flowers is when I was a little kid in Lincoln, Nebraska in the summertime. And I probably was a toddler or something. And I remember walking over to the edge of our garden and smelling a bearded iris. Now, if you can think of the smell of that in your mind's eye, it's quite distinct. And whenever I see a bearded iris nowadays in my neighborhood, I stop and smell, and it instantly brings me back to that moment. You know how much scent can bring you back to a certain time or place even more than hearing or seeing. So that's probably my earliest memory of that bearded iris, and I still love those. Now, another memory that maybe you only could relate to if you're older like me is really low-tech art on the sidewalk. And have any of you ever tried drawing on the sidewalk with geranium petals? Who knows what a geranium is? So they're really beautiful flowers that a lot of people have in people's gardens, like in flower baskets. And they have these bright red petals. And I remember we used to tear those petals off and we would rub them on the sidewalk and they would make bright red. Like we could do the, what is the name of that thing where you're on the sidewalk and you're doing the, oh, hopscotch. Yeah, you know how you do hop, 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 hop. We would draw the hopscotch with geranium petals, bright red. So that's another really early memory I have when I was probably only maybe 8 or 10 or something. And then another thing I was thinking of were these flowers. I don't have a picture of them now, but you probably know what periwinkles look like. They're kind of like a bluish purple, and they've got these 5 petals. And I used to love to tear those apart. And inside, in the very center, was this kind of hard white part with like a stem on it, about this long. And it was actually the pistil of the flower, or the female part of the flower, but it was really firm. And I used to be able to put that in my ear like a little stud earring, and it was made a little tiny white earring. I don't know if any of you have ever done that before, and I don't know where I got the idea, but of course I was a little kid that was always playing in the backyard and playing with flowers. Now, maybe you remember maybe pressing a wildflower between sheets of paper when you were a kid. Maybe you put it in your journal. I used to love to do that. Or make daisy chains. Have any of you guys made daisy chains? Please tell me. I don't see any comments yet, but if you're live with me or even in the replay, I'd love to know if you have any of these same memories. Well, one of them is making daisy chains, right? You take these little white daisies and you put them together in a chain around your neck. Really low tech, again, artwork that we used to do when we were kids in the 70s and 80s. Oh yeah, another thing we did with daisies is the love me not thing, where you pull it off and you're like, he loves me not, he loves me, he loves me not. So that's another flower memory. Again, I'm talking about these flower memories because I'm making these class I'll tell you about later. Um, and then when I got older, in high school, I remember my first prom, my first dance, and the young man is supposed to give you a corsage. And I just remember this beautiful flower. I don't know if it was an orchid or a white rose, but a nice corsage he gave me. And I felt so grown up when I had that. But I think one of the biggest flower memories I have being growing up was in high school. And it was actually an assignment, a high school assignment in my biology class. I think when I was probably in 10th grade. And this high school biology assignment literally changed my life. It made me go in the direction I am now with online education. Well, maybe not online, but education for sure. And what was it? It was making a collection, a flower collection. And I still remember my teacher. He was so awesome. I don't know if he's alive anymore, but we had to go around the county and we had to collect these flowers and identify them using a flower key. And I don't know if any of you guys have ever tried using a flower key, but it's basically where you identify a flower using a series of questions, like this dichotomous key, where there's two questions, and whichever one is correct for your flower, then you go to the next step and answer two more questions, and then two more questions, and eventually you come to the identification of the flower. And so I did this that I still have from, yes, 1980. And so this is one of the oldest things I own, is that I still kept this. I was so proud of this flower collection, and I found that keying out flowers and then pressing them and identifying them and making notes about where I found them was so interesting. And I really remember it was a really fun project for my dad to help me with, because my dad and I were really close. Oh, here was star thistle, which really wasn't a native at all. It's a invasive non-native from Europe, but this thing was all over my horse pasture, and I had to pick it all the time because it would get in the horse's fur, and it was really dangerous for them to eat. So that's a bad memory. But anyway, I remember my dad. He was so sweet. He drove me all over the county where I lived in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains, kind of between Sacramento and Lake Tahoe. And he drove me all over the county, and we went and looked for all of these plants that I identified. Isn't that cool? This is one of the oldest things I have, probably the only thing I have left from my high school years, because I did not keep my FFA jacket, which I really wish I did. So that was a really cool memory. And creating this collection of wildflowers in my 10th grade biology class is really what inspired me to become a scientist. I thought it was so interesting, solving a puzzle and going out around the county and walking all these trails and Forest Service roads was just so interesting. And then identifying it and then getting my 4 points from the teacher for every one I got right. And I actually went on, of course, to study biology. I got a bachelor's and a master's degree in biology. And I went on to make a lot of other flower collections. Some of them went into herbariums at times when I worked for different organizations like the National Park Service. So that was a really good memory as well. Now, fast forward many years later, I work in biology and I've worked in botany and had jobs where I was out in the field collecting plants and identifying them. I actually, for my master's degree, studied a carnivorous plant that has a very beautiful flower. And I spent several summers camping all by myself in the Sierra Nevada mountains while I was taking all of these flowers and trying to determine the pollinator and collecting the pollen and collecting the insects and identifying them. And once actually I was camping and I had left some yummy fruit in my car overnight. And you can probably imagine what happened. A bear broke into my car. You got on the top of the car and was pushing in the top of the roof of the car. And then the bear flattened my tire because it was trying to get inside to that watermelon I think I had. And so his flattened it. Anyway, I had to drive my car about 50 miles to go get it fixed on one of those tiny tires they used to have on your car instead of the full-sized growing up extra spare tire we have nowadays. So that was a pretty funny memory. But, you know, over the years, I've loved teaching kids about flowers and plants and pollinators. I've had jobs going into schools where I was doing Artist in the Schools programs, and I would correlate with middle school science curriculums. And once I spent a whole week with a 6th grade class. It was really fun in Marin County, California. And I taught the kids all about the cycle of a flower, from the seed to the adult flower, and then to the pollination. And we drew pollen under the microscope, and we drew pollinating honeybees with the microscopic pollen on their legs, and then we drew the seeds, and that was really interesting. Oh yeah, speaking of seeds, I've got some really cool seeds here. So you can't forget that wildflowers, as well as any other plant that makes a flower, creates a seed eventually. And some of the seed capsules are very beautiful. This one is actually from a lily plant, and I illustrated this lily for a scientist once. And then the poppies, like the oriental poppies, they have very interesting seed pods. The seeds come out of these holes. Oh, there's still some seeds in the hole there coming out. And then the other big ones, these are teasel, and they kind of are quite spiny. So, oh yeah, and this one's very beautiful. I found this in the Central America. This is some sort of a pea pod. And look at those bright red berries. I think these are poisonous actually, so I won't be eating these. But as you probably know, I've been lucky to travel too and have a lot of memories of seeing tropical wildflowers, like of course orchids and heliconias, and all that kind of stuff. Oh, Pauline says you dressed up as a dandelion. Oh, I love that. To teach young and old kids that dandelions are not weeds, but have many redeeming properties. Pauline, yes, you're totally right. In fact, the leaves, I believe, are very high in vitamin C. And that's another thing, is wildflowers, many of the petals are edible. Now, I'm not suggesting you just go out and start eating them because I don't want to get blamed for you getting poisoned. But nowadays, you know, if you go to a fancy restaurant, you can get a salad with flower petals on it. So that's another memory I have, and another way flowers are in our lives, right? Yeah. Oh, yeah. I was talking about traveling and, oh, yeah, carnivorous plants. I've seen crazy species of carnivorous plants, especially in Borneo, which are there many species of the Nepenthes or pitcher plants. And Borneo also has the world's largest flower that I saw that's this big. It's one individual flower. And in fact, if you have been following me for long, you may have done my workshop on that flower, the Rafflesia wildflower. What else? Oh, Ginny says, yes, my memories of younger days on the Oregon coast was the beauty of the native rhododendrons. Yes. And there's actually a lot of rhodies in Asia as well. I remember seeing those too in different places. And it's always interesting to see a plant, or at least a plant family that you're familiar with at home, and see them at a new location. It's almost like running into a friend at an airport in Europe or something, far from home, and you're like, what? I don't know. You're in the wrong place. So it's really fun to see certain plants and see them as old friends, just like when you see our migrating songbirds that go into Central America, if you're lucky enough to be in Central America in the winter. All the migrants are there. Like I was saying, in the tropics, I've seen lots of wildflowers like orchids and heliconias and gingers. And in tropical places, they have very interesting pollinators. And that's something you want to notice when you're out sketching your flowers in the field. And something we'll talk about this Saturday in my workshop are pollinators. And when most people think of a wildflower pollinator, they think of a honeybee, right? Which are actually native to Europe, but they're very important nowadays here for pollinating many flower and vegetable crops. So pollinators not only include, what was I saying? Oh, yeah, honeybees, but also bumblebees and butterflies and moths. And of course, hummingbirds, if you're lucky enough to live somewhere where hummingbirds are. And you may have taken one of my many workshops on hummingbirds, both tropical and temperate ones. Those have a very close relationship with wildflowers. But in the tropics, wildflowers are often pollinated by other things, including bats. I've seen giant bats not only pollinating flowers, but also helping to disperse the seeds once the flowers are mature, and there's these big fat fruits on the trees. The bats will eat those fruits and then defecate the seeds in a different place and help to distribute those flowers on those trees. And people forget when they think of wildflowers, you often think of a meadow of wildflowers like California poppies. But many trees, of course, are flowering as well. And you get a lot more of those in the tropics than you do here in the northern hemispheres.